Lily's footsteps echoed softly against the pavement as she made her usual walk home from school. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the golden afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet street. She was humming a song, swinging her backpack from side to side, when something made her stop. Near the old, abandoned shed at the edge of the park, a small shape lay curled in the dirt. At first, Lily thought it was just a pile of rags, tossed aside like so many forgotten things. But then, it moved. She took a cautious step forward, her heart pounding. It was a dog. Not just any dog. This one looked like it had been through a terrible battle. His fur was matted, thin patches revealing the sharp outlines of his ribs. His legs were tucked under his fragile body, as if he was trying to make himself invisible. His ears barely twitched at her approach. Lily dropped to her knees. "Hey there," she whispered, careful not to startle him. The dog's eyes flickered open, dull and tired. They were a deep brown, almost black, but held no spark of life. Just exhaustion. Just pain. Lily swallowed hard. She had seen stray dogs before, wandering through the neighborhood, looking for food scraps. But this was different. This dog wasn't just homeless, he was dying. Her fingers tightened around the straps of her backpack. She knew what most people would do. They would shake their heads, maybe sigh, then walk away. But Lily's heart ached at the thought of leaving him there, alone in the dirt. She glanced around. The streets were empty. No one else had noticed him. No one else seemed to care. Without hesitation, she reached out. The dog flinched, his body tensing. Lily froze. "It's okay," she whispered. "I won't hurt you." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind rustled the branches overhead, and in the distance, a car rumbled down the street. The dog's breathing was shallow, uneven. Lily could see his chest rise and fall, slow and unsteady. She had to do something. Carefully, she slipped off her jacket and laid it over him, hoping to give him warmth. He didn't react. Her heart sank. Was she already too late? No, she refused to believe that. "I'll be right back," she promised, scrambling to her feet. She ran, faster than she ever had before. The world blurred around her, but she didn't care. There was only one thought in her mind. She had to help him. By the time she burst through the front door of her house, gasping for breath, her mother looked up in alarm. "Lily, what's wrong?" She didn't even pause. "Blanket, food, water. Hurry." Her mother barely had time to react before Lily grabbed a soft old towel from the laundry basket and stuffed a piece of bread into her pocket. Without waiting for permission, she dashed back outside. The sun had dipped lower now, the sky painted in soft pinks and purples. Lily's chest burned from running, but she didn't stop until she reached the shed. The dog hadn't moved. Her heart pounded as she knelt beside him again, gently wrapping the towel around his frail body. She tore the bread into tiny pieces and held one out. "Please eat," she murmured. "Just a little bit." The dog sniffed weakly, but he didn't take it. Tears stung Lily's eyes. What if he was too sick? What if she was too late? No, she wouldn't let that happen. She settled beside him, refusing to leave. The world might have abandoned him, but she wouldn't. And deep inside, she hoped. No, she knew that this was just the beginning. Lily sat beside the dog, her small hands trembling as she adjusted the blanket around his frail body. His breathing was slow, each rise and fall of his chest barely noticeable. A lump formed in her throat. What if he didn't make it through the night? "No," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." But deep down, doubt gnawed at her. The dog still hadn't touched the food. His eyes barely flickered open when she spoke to him. He was too weak, too cold. She needed to do more. Her mind raced. She could take him home, hide him in her room, just for tonight. But what if her parents said no? What if they made her take him back outside? She wasn't willing to take that risk. Instead, she jumped to her feet, scooping her arms around the bundle of fur and bones. The dog let out a weak whimper, but he didn't resist. He was too light, far too light for a dog his size. The realization made her grip him even tighter. "I've got you," she whispered. She ran home as fast as her legs would carry her, clutching him close to her chest. Every step felt like a battle against time. The sky had darkened, and a cool breeze swept through the streets. He needed warmth. He needed help. By the time she reached her front porch, her mother was already at the door, concern etched across her face. "Lily, what in the world?" No time to explain. Lily burst inside, heading straight for the living room. She carefully laid the dog on the couch, tucking the blanket around him. "He's sick, Mom. He's really sick." Her father entered the room, his brow furrowed. "Where did you find him?" "Near the old shed. He was just lying there. If I left him, he would have." She choked on the words. Her mother knelt beside the couch, studying the frail creature. A heavy silence filled the room. "We need to take him to the vet," her father finally said. Lily's heart lifted. "Really?" Her father sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "He needs care we can't give him. But Lily, you need to prepare yourself. He doesn't look good." Lily bit her lip. She knew, but she also knew she couldn't give up. Within minutes, they had wrapped the dog in another blanket and carried him to the car. The entire ride to the vet, Lily kept her hand on his back, feeling the faint warmth of his body, whispering soft words of encouragement. "Just hold on, okay? We're almost there." When they finally arrived, the bright fluorescent lights of the clinic made everything feel more real. A nurse took one look at the dog and rushed him into the examination room. Lily stood frozen, her fists clenched. And then the vet came out, his face unreadable. Lily swallowed hard. "Is he going to be okay?" The vet sighed. "We'll do everything we can." But even as he said the words, Lily could see the doubt in his eyes. And she knew the battle had only just begun. Lily sat on the edge of the chair in the waiting room, her small fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and something strangely metallic. She could hear the hum of machines behind the closed doors, the occasional murmur of voices, and the distant barks of healthier dogs. But none of that mattered. All she could think about was the frail creature being examined beyond those doors. Her parents sat beside her, their expressions unreadable. They had already warned her not to get her hopes up, but Lily refused to listen. The door creaked open, and the vet stepped out, his expression calm but serious. "The dog," he hesitated, then sighed. "He's in bad shape." Lily's heart clenched. "He's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and has multiple infections. His heart is weak, and we're not sure if his organs have taken permanent damage." The vet folded his arms. "Even with treatment, the chances aren't great." Lily's fingers curled into fists. "But there's still a chance, right?" The vet hesitated. "A very small one." That was all she needed to hear. "We'll take him," she said without hesitation. Her father sighed. "Lily." "No," she said, turning to face them. "I found him. I'm not giving up on him." Her mother and father exchanged a glance. Then, to her surprise, her father nodded. "He'll need constant care," the vet warned. "Regular feeding, medicine, warmth. It won't be easy." Lily lifted her chin. "I'll do whatever it takes." A few minutes later, the clinic staff brought the dog back out. He was wrapped in warm blankets, an IV still connected to his tiny paw. His eyes barely opened as they set him gently in Lily's arms. "Take him home," the vet said softly. "Give him love. It might make the difference." The ride home was silent. Lily held the dog close, feeling the slow rise and fall of his chest. His body was warm now, but he was still so weak. When they arrived, she carefully carried him inside, setting up a soft bed in her room. She placed a small bowl of water next to him and a plate of soft food, watching anxiously. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, just as she was about to lose hope, his nose twitched. Lily held her breath. Slowly, he nudged the food with his snout. And then, he took a bite. Lily's eyes filled with tears. It was small. It was barely anything. But it was a start. And for the first time that night, she believed. Lily barely slept that night. She lay curled up on the floor beside the small bed she had made for Lucky, watching his slow, unsteady breathing. Every few hours, she carefully spooned water into his mouth, whispering words of encouragement. Sometimes his ears twitched. Other times he barely responded. Her parents had checked in on her more than once, each time gently suggesting she get some rest. But Lily refused. He had spent who knew how long alone in the cold. She wouldn't let him feel that way again. By morning, something had changed. The first rays of sunlight streamed through her window, casting a warm glow over the room. Lily stirred, rubbing her tired eyes. And then she saw it. Lucky's eyes were open. Not just open aware. She gasped, sitting up. Lucky. His head lifted, barely an inch, but it was enough. His deep brown eyes met hers, and for the first time, they held something new. Life. A burst of hope swelled in her chest. She reached for the small plate of food beside him, scooping a tiny piece into her hand. Try it again, she murmured. He sniffed it. Then, to her amazement, he licked it off her palm. Lily beamed. Good boy. From that moment, something inside Lucky seemed to awaken. Over the next few days, he ate more. He drank on his own. He even wagged his tail, a weak, barely noticeable movement at first, but Lily saw it. And every little improvement felt like a miracle. Her parents couldn't believe it. I thought he wouldn't last a night, her father admitted as they watched Lucky attempt to stand one afternoon. He wobbled, his legs shaky and uncertain, but he didn't collapse. Lily held her breath, hands hovering near him, ready to catch him if needed. Lucky took one step, then another. Then he turned slowly and nuzzled his nose against Lily's palm. Tears pricked her eyes. She stroked his head gently, feeling the warmth beneath his fur. You're going to be okay, she whispered. And for the first time, she truly believed it. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Lucky's recovery was only the beginning. Because something about him was different. Something that would soon leave everyone speechless. Lucky's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Every day, Lily watched in awe as he grew stronger, more alert, and more energetic. The dog that had once barely been able to lift his head now bounded around the house, wagging his tail with excitement whenever Lily came into the room. But there was something else about him that was even more strange, something no one could explain. It wasn't just his physical recovery. There was a certain awareness in his eyes, something that went beyond the usual understanding dogs had of their owners. He seemed to know exactly when Lily was sad or upset. One afternoon, Lily came home from school feeling down. Her friends had been distant that day, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As soon as she stepped into her room, she collapsed on her bed, burying her face in her pillow. And then she felt it. A warm, wet nose pressed against her cheek. She pulled the pillow away, startled to find Lucky standing beside her, his brown eyes full of concern. He gently nudged her hand with his nose, his body tense with worry. Lily sat up, bewildered. How did you know? She whispered, her heart racing. Lucky sat beside her, his head tilted, his gaze unwavering. It was as though he could sense the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Without a word, she reached out to pet him, and instantly she felt a wave of calm wash over her. She didn't know how or why, but she felt better. It was like the weight of the world had lifted, if only for a moment. Her parents had noticed too. Her mother, who had been skeptical about Lucky's recovery, now watched him with growing curiosity. One evening, as Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, struggling with her homework, she felt something strange, a tingling sense of unease. Her pencil fell from her hand, and she turned around, only to find Lucky standing in the doorway, staring at her with intense focus. Lucky, Lily said softly, her voice faltering. But he didn't move. His gaze was locked on her, and there was something almost protective in his posture. Then suddenly, he bolted from the room. Lily blinked, confused. She stood up, following him out the door just in time to see him rush toward the front yard. Her heart skipped a beat. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a car speeding down the street, its tires screeching as it veered toward the curb. Without thinking, Lily ran after Lucky, but she didn't make it far before he darted ahead, his body like a blur. She watched in stunned silence as Lucky ran straight into the path of the car, barking loudly. The driver slammed on the brakes, swerving just in time to avoid hitting him. The car came to a screeching halt a few feet away from Lily, and the driver leaned out of the window, shouting in panic, "Are you okay? What are you doing in the street?" Lily didn't answer. She was too shocked to speak. Lucky stood protectively in front of her, his body tense and alert, as though he had known something was wrong long before she did. The driver stared at them for a moment longer, then quickly sped off, muttering something under his breath. Lily stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. Lucky turned back toward her, wagging his tail, his eyes calm but watchful. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. "Lucky," she whispered, her voice shaky. "You saved me." But what she didn't know was that this wasn't the first time Lucky had stepped in to protect her. And it wouldn't be the last. The days following Lucky's unexpected rescue left Lily both shaken and in awe. She couldn't explain how or why he had acted the way he did, but there was no doubt in her mind. Lucky had saved her. In the days that followed, Lily grew more attuned to the subtle changes in Lucky. He wasn't just a pet anymore. He was something more. He had become her protector, a silent guardian who seemed to know when something was wrong. But it wasn't just the close call with the car that made Lily realize how extraordinary Lucky had become. A few weeks later, an even more dangerous situation would unfold, one that would cement Lucky's status as a true hero in Lily's eyes. It was a Saturday afternoon when Lily decided to go for a walk by the creek that ran behind her house. The weather was perfect, sunshine filtering through the trees, a cool breeze, and the sound of the water rushing over the rocks. She hadn't planned to go far, but when she saw the small path leading deeper into the woods, her curiosity got the better of her. "I'll be back in a bit, Lucky," she called, turning to give him one last glance before she made her way down the trail. But as she walked further into the woods, she quickly lost track of time. The deeper she went, the more peaceful it became, and soon she reached a part of the creek where the water flowed faster. The rocks were slick with moss, and Lily, lost in the beauty of her surroundings, didn't notice the danger. The next thing she knew, her foot slipped. She gasped as her ankle twisted painfully, the ground beneath her giving way as she lost her balance. Her body tipped sideways, and in a flash, she tumbled toward the water. Panic surged through her as the cold, rushing current hit her legs, sweeping her off her feet. She flailed, trying to grab onto something, but the rocks were too smooth, the water too powerful. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the rushing water. Her heart raced as she struggled to stay above the surface, but her ankle throbbed with pain, and the current pulled at her body, dragging her farther downstream. Desperation set in as she realized how dangerous the situation had become. And then, just as the water began to pull her under, she heard it, a bark. Lucky. She looked around frantically, trying to find him, but the creek was too loud. The water was moving too quickly. And then, from the corner of her eye, she saw him, running toward her, barking urgently, his body low to the ground as if he were chasing something. "Lucky!" she cried out in disbelief. Before she could process what was happening, Lucky dashed past her and dove into the creek. He swam with surprising strength, his body cutting through the water effortlessly. Lily's heart stopped as she saw him swim toward her, his powerful strokes bringing him closer with every second. He was coming for her. With all the strength he had, Lucky grabbed hold of Lily's shirt with his teeth, pulling her toward the bank. The current was still strong, but his determination was stronger. Slowly but surely, he dragged her to safety, the sound of his breath coming in sharp pants as he pulled her to the edge of the creek. Finally, Lily's hands met solid ground. With one last effort, Lucky tugged her away from the water and onto the bank, collapsing beside her, panting heavily. She couldn't speak, couldn't even move, her heart racing in her chest as she processed what had just happened. Lucky, the dog she had saved months ago, had now saved her. As she lay there, breathless and stunned, Lucky nudged her hand, his eyes full of concern. She laughed weakly, tears in her eyes. "You really are my hero," she whispered, her voice cracking. And from that moment on, Lily knew that no matter what happened, no matter how difficult life might become, she and Lucky would always have each other. As the days passed, Lily couldn't stop thinking about what had happened by the creek. Lucky had saved her again. But this time, it felt different. The connection she felt with him had deepened, and it was no longer just a sense of gratitude. Something about Lucky felt otherworldly. She had seen him act with an intelligence and purpose that no dog she had ever known seemed capable of. The way he seemed to anticipate danger, his heightened awareness of her emotions, and his near-miraculous recovery, all of it pointed to something beyond the ordinary. Her parents had no answers. Her mom thought it was just a series of fortunate coincidences, and her father remained skeptical, chalking it up to instinct and training. But Lily knew better. She had lived with Lucky long enough to see the signs. There was something unique about him, something powerful. It was late one night when Lily finally decided to investigate. She sat cross-legged on her bed, Lucky curled up beside her. The soft glow of her desk lamp cast long shadows on the walls as she flipped through old journals and books. She was searching for anything that could explain Lucky's extraordinary abilities. She didn't know what she was looking for, just some kind of sign, some clue that might make sense of everything. After what felt like hours of reading through obscure stories about dogs with heightened senses, Lily stumbled across something that made her pause. It was a small paragraph in a book about ancient myths and legends. The passage described a story from a distant land, a tale about guardian creatures, beings that were said to be sent by the gods to protect those in need. According to the legend, these creatures could sense danger long before it arrived, and they possessed extraordinary healing abilities. They were chosen not by fate, but by a divine force, marked by a unique bond with the humans they were meant to protect. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she read the last line. Once chosen, the Guardian's powers would grow stronger with each act of protection, and those they protected would come to understand that the creature was never truly ordinary. She reread the passage several times, her mind racing. Could it be possible? Was Lucky somehow a guardian creature? Before she could process the thought, Lucky stirred beside her, his tail thumping softly against the floor. He looked up at her, those deep, knowing eyes meeting hers. She smiled, shaking her head in disbelief. You couldn't possibly be a guardian creature, could you? She whispered to him. Lucky responded with a soft bark, as if to say, maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Livy's heart pounded in her chest. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces seemed to fit. Lucky's incredible recovery, his unnatural awareness of danger, his healing abilities, all of it pointed to something far beyond a typical dog's instincts. And yet, if Lucky was indeed a guardian creature, it raised even more questions. Who had chosen him? Why had he been sent to her? What was his true purpose? For the first time, Lily realized she might never know all the answers. But one thing was certain, Lucky wasn't just any dog. He was something extraordinary, something she could never take for granted. And she was going to protect him, just as he had protected her. Lily sat quietly by the window, her eyes fixed on Lucky, who lay in the sunbeam streaming through the glass. The golden light washed over his fur, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful, normal. But in her heart, she knew things could never go back to the way they had been before. Lucky was no ordinary dog. The realization weighed on her, a mix of awe and uncertainty. Every protective instinct she had kicked in, she couldn't ignore what he had done for her, couldn't forget what she had discovered. If Lucky was truly one of the guardian creatures from the ancient legend, then there was something bigger at play. She wondered if he knew too, if he understood the significance of the bond they shared. That night, as Lily sat in her room, writing in her journal, Lucky curled up next to her, as if he knew she needed him more than ever. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, her thoughts scattered. What was the real purpose behind his arrival in her life? And why was it so important that she knew the truth? Her parents had grown more comfortable with the idea of Lucky being a little different. They could no longer deny the fact that he was special, but they still didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Lily, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something even greater was coming. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Lucky's sharp bark, breaking the silence of the night. His body was tense, and his eyes were fixed on the door. Lily's heart raced. She could feel the shift in the air, a kind of electric tension that hadn't been there before. Lucky was alert. He was sensing something. She slowly got up, her feet moving toward the door. "What is it, Lucky?" she whispered. Her hand gripped the doorknob, but before she could open it, she heard a soft knock. 3 quick raps on the other side. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. A voice, low and calm, answered from beyond the door. "We need to talk." Lily's heart skipped a beat. There was something in that voice that made her skin crawl with a mix of fear and curiosity. Slowly, she opened the door to find a tall figure standing in the dim hallway. The person wore a dark cloak, and the hood was pulled low over their face, obscuring their features. But there was no mistaking the aura of authority that surrounded them. Lucky growled softly from behind her, but the figure didn't flinch. "Lily," the voice continued, softer now, but still commanding. "You've uncovered something you weren't meant to. The creature by your side is not just a guardian. He is a key." Lily's blood ran cold. A key to what? The figure stepped closer, their shadow falling across the threshold. A key to unlocking an ancient power, one that has been waiting for someone like you. Lily's mind raced. This was happening faster than she could process. She glanced down at Lucky, who now stood firmly at her side, as though ready to protect her from whatever lay ahead. "You need to come with me," the figure said. "The time is near. There are forces that will come for him." Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know whether to trust this mysterious stranger, but one thing was certain. Her journey with Lucky was far from over. Lucky's ears perked up, and for the first time, Lily realized that this wasn't just about protecting him anymore. It was about a greater mission, a mission she was now bound to, just as much as he was. She nodded, the weight of her decision settling in. "I'm ready." With that, the figure turned and Lily followed, Lucky by her side, stepping into the unknown. The adventure she had unknowingly begun was just beginning, and the world would soon know just how much power a small girl and her extraordinary dog could wield.